Thank you. So before we start, I don't know this audience, so I haven't met hardly any of you. Can I just check, who works in an organisation with more than 200 people in it? More than 1,000? More than 5,000? About. Okay, so you're an enterprise. I just wanted to get a sense of where you guys were coming from and what sort of sizes of organisations you've worked in. Because I've worked in some small organisations, like under 100 people, or sort of 50 or 60 people, and I've worked in one of 60,000 people. So I've kind of got these different perspectives, and I'm not really. I have spent some of my career in systems administration, and quite a lot of it in network administration, and I don't really have any development background. So I'm really coming at this from the operations side of things. But I have observed a lot in my career, and that was some of the inspiration for this talk. But I'll tell you a bit more about myself now. So I have spent about 10 years working in managed service providers and hosting companies and telcos particularly. And I have had roles in telcos which were very much about trying to introduce new ideas and bring new things to the table and introduce new products and get them to think about maybe how they're going to solve this kind of pressure on their profit margins purely in delivering connectivity. And the traditional way of doing that, or conventional wisdom, is let's get into cloud services and let's do that. So I've been doing a lot of that sort of work, and that's helped me with the inspiration for this talk. Something else that inspired me to do it was I went to a conference called the Cloud Foundry Summit. So my second question is, who knows what Cloud Foundry is? Okay, a few people do. Who's actually used it? Got one there, thanks Andy. So I went to their European Summit. I had the first one in Berlin last November, and a guy called Colin Humphreys was speaking. He was one of the keynote speakers. He had a consultancy called Cloud Credo, which he sold for Pivotal, who were the company behind Cloud Foundry. And he had this quote, and he did a great presentation on what it really means, or what's involved in enterprises starting to go through that journey of DevOps and go to the end goal of DevOps and automation, which is to build a platform. So if you get really, really good at automating all your stuff, what you end up with, ideally, is this magic button that you just push your code in at one end, and then your production running environment pops out the other end. And Colin said this. He said that the point of this cloud native enterprise, this is this term that's sort of come into common usage recently, particularly around Pivotal, but I think there's other the cloud native foundation as well. And the idea that we are architecting applications specifically for the cloud. We're not forklifting them in and then refactoring them. We're actually thinking, well, how do I need to design this so that it actually works from day one in a cloud? So that's the cloud native essence, really. And if you apply that to an enterprise, and then you say, well, what's the point of that? It's all about trying to have that continuous innovation and doing a platform. So this is the way this talk should work. So just bear with me for a second. If anything goes wrong here, obviously wave your hands at me and let me know. So I'm going to explain a little bit about the problem here in what Colin's saying. So what you find when you get better and better and better, I think, at DevOps and building these platforms, which is the end goal, is that the organization doesn't necessarily know how to start embracing that stuff. And the closest analogy I found in my career was converged infrastructure. So we've now got the same thing with these software platforms, in that you try and simplify everything down so you've got a single point of entry, but the organization is split up into teams that can't interact with that. So if you've ever used something called a vBlock, that is basically this idea that you can put your storage and your servers and your networking into one nice unified stack, and that you've got one way of interacting with that. But your organization isn't designed like that. So I've actually, been working at EMC and seen organizations buy these things, And then they go, oh, right, can we chop this up? Yeah, can we just give the network bit to network guys, and the server bit to the server guys, and the storage bit to the storage guys? It's like, no, that's not the point. But they bought it. They didn't want to have unified infrastructure. They wanted to just buy it for the simplicity of the transaction. So that's an illustration of how, when you start to change the technology that you're consuming in the organization, and you're saying, we're going to build pipelines, and we're going to build DevOps, and we're going to have these platforms at the other end that are squirting our code into them. What does that mean for the organization? How do you have to change? So that's the problem I want to explain. And then I want to give some idea of where we're heading towards. So quite a lot has been spoken about, if you're going to be a cloud-native enterprise and act in this way, what do you need to look like? How should your teams be arranged, and how should you be thinking about how to work? And then if you find yourself in an organization and you want to implement some of these ideas, what can I give you as a kind of guide and for your quest, if you're a crusader, if you're like these guys and you're kind of in your organization, you're standing there looking at the castle, and they're going to be chucking stuff at you, saying, no, that isn't how we want to do it. How can I help you with that? And because I'm not an expert on this, where can I point you to give you some more help with this and some professional guidance? So I asked the question at the start about enterprises and who'd worked in large organizations. It doesn't sound like many of you have. But depending on your definition, an enterprise can be anything from a few thousand up to tens of thousands of people. Certainly, if I worked at EMC for a bit, and they considered everything above sort of 5,000 to be enterprise. Anything under that, it's not even going to think about. It's just mid-market. So enterprises, they look like that, and they make lots of money, and they're run by big old gentlemen with beards and top hats, and they've got thousands of people in them. But the thing with enterprises is that if you compare them with startups, they should actually have all the advantages, because they've got all their customers to learn stuff from, and they've got all the money to actually do things with it. So why would they have a problem with being quick and nimble and agile and actually having this continuous innovation approach to delivering software? Well, the thing is with enterprises is that they aren't that clever, or they don't appear to be, because they've never heard that Mark Andreessen quote. Now, I did this presentation at Lopug, and I knew that everybody in the room would have heard about software is eating the world, right? That quote has appeared in every presentation that I have seen, for quite a long time. And the same, I think, goes for this idea of Conway's Law. Who knows what Conway's Law is? Okay. Right. So Conway's Law is the idea that any organization that designs a system, the output of that system will be a mirror image of the communication pattern of the organization, right? And this is really important when you're thinking about things like microservices, because it dictates how you set up your teams. So you don't create your teams and then tell them what to build. You say, what am I going to build? What does my architecture, my application need to look like? And then you design your organization around that. That's how you put Conway's Law into action to combat having your database team, and your application team, and your front end team. No, you say this is what the application needs to look like. We're going to design it around these services. So enterprises, they don't know these things, so it's a real challenge for them. And cloud has happened, it's turned the world upside down, and they're in a fight for their lives, because some new Uber or Airbnb is going to turn up and put them out of business, no matter what industry sector they're in. Okay, so why haven't they been paying attention to this stuff? Well, enterprises, stepping out of the shop there, they're not beings, right? So whenever a salesperson, or you hear somebody say, well, enterprises want this, right? And startups, so it's okay for startups, but enterprises want this. You've got to call in the clue police, because enterprises don't want anything. What people want stuff. And in enterprises, because there's so many people, They all just want different things. That's the thing with enterprises. So it's all about the conflicts that they have internally and their need to serve the hierarchy, and that's why they appear to have certain characteristics. Now, if you were going to try and become a more cloud-native enterprise, let's say that you are an organization of 1,000 to 20,000 people, and you've got, maybe you've got hundreds of developers, and you're working on loads of applications, and you find it very, very difficult to move quickly, and very, very difficult to release software quickly, and you are architecting things in a very old-fashioned way. What might you need to start thinking about in order to change the way the organization works? So a lot of stuff's been written about this that I've read, but one of the most recent things was this kind of nice quadrant that McKinsey came up with. And McKinsey is a consultancy firm, but they're one of the first moments I've seen where there's been a mainstream big consultancy now saying, this is what a cloud-native enterprise needs to look like. This is what you need to do, or this is what you should look like if you're going to be like an agile organization. So you may not be able to see all the details here, but there's certain tenets that would apply to being an agile enterprise. Quick to mobilize, you're nimble, you're collaborative, you've got all this free flow of information, and you're very resilient and you learn from failure. So you've got a design for failure mentality, and you just know how to architect in the cloud. And the opposite of that is down here, where you're never making any progress, you can't deliver anything, you're constantly firefighting, everybody hates each other in the organization, and there's just no collaboration at all. So that's kind of the opposite part of the quadrant. So that's what we're heading for. So let's go and see how we get there. And I sort of tried to boil all of that down to three things, because there's too much on that slide. So I've tried to pick three things which I think really embody this cloud-native enterprise concept. And the first thing is having a purpose for the organization. Now, this is something which is really powerful, because as soon as everybody in the organization knows why it exists, it enables you to scale decision-making. And the thing with enterprises is that it's so hierarchical that sometimes, in some places, you find that no one can make a decision. No one wants to be accountable for things. And you start to get these sort of almost like a feudal system of people who believe different things, and they've got different goals, and they start to conflict, and you have this distinction within the organisation. You can get rid of all of that to a certain extent if everybody believes in the same purpose. So you all know why this company exists, and it's not to make money. It's so you can, improve the lives of your customers in a particular way, or change the world in this way. It's got to be a real purpose to it. But it means that people are really motivated to come into work because they want to be connected with that higher purpose, and they can make their own decisions because they're saying, should I do this thing or not? Does it help us achieve this purpose? Yes, no. And that's how they are able to then act autonomously. So that's the real root of the sort of bringing startup mentality into enterprise. And once you've done that, so you've got your purpose, you know why the company exists, and everybody's really motivated and they're coming into work and they're thinking for themselves, how are you going to measure progress? Because the traditional way of doing this is a project mentality, isn't it? So we've all worked on projects, and a project has a start date, and then you start trudging towards some fictional end date for the project, and inevitably you're never going to hit that date, and you're going to go over budget. And what you had to do to create this beautiful Gantt chart was pretend that you knew in advance all the things that were going to happen, and you could plan for those contingencies. That's what a project's like. But the idea of a product is that you're not going to have a finite amount of time. A product just persists forever. So every part of the Amazon retail experience, or every service in AWS is a product. It has a product team, right? If you're in the EC2 product team, you're in a cross-functional team with a product manager and some engineers and a marketing person and a commercial person, and everybody in that team is there, and they're just living every day of their lives just to make that product better. They're not on the EC2 project. They're not going to just disappear and go and work on some other project. That's what they're doing, right? And they live that, and they live with the consequences of their decisions. So they're in complete control of how EC2 works. They can make the decisions of how what technology is built on, how it's going to be priced, how they're going to deliver it to market, all of those things, right? And the person with the project mentality is in that team as well. But if they make a decision on a Monday morning, they're going to live with that decision in 6 months' time or a year's time. A project team won't. They'll just move on to something else, and that's the difference between products and projects. So definitely agree with that one. There's absolutely no reason at all why we can't be doing that. So that was point number 2. We're on our way to the cloud native thinking. We're taking Silicon Valley thinking and applying it to the modern massive enterprise. Sorry, I just skipped ahead. What I forgot to say with this one was, when you've got your product, how are you going to measure the outcomes of that? So normally, what you do is you get your project, and then you're saying there's going to be this thing we've got to deliver, and that's the measure of success, right? So you've got that measure of success, and it's the output from the project. Instead of doing that, what you need to say is, what is the thing we wanted to achieve by doing that thing? What difference does it make for us to actually to deliver that thing? And that we need to find a metric for that outcome, and then we need to measure that. Then get to the products, not projects. So I skipped ahead a little bit. The last thing to say about products and the projects is that you've heard the concept of 2 pizza teams. That was the kind of that was the phrase that Jeff Bezos used in Amazon to say, this is how you get everyone together in one team and start to share that knowledge. As was said earlier, you've got that cross-pollination of information and ideas, and they live with the consequences of their decisions. So yeah, that is a great idea too. So those 3 things, I believe, are kind of the core of a lot of what's coming through in this cloud native enterprise idea. Now, it's easy, right? So why would anyone not want to do this stuff? What is wrong with enterprises? Why can't they just adopt this? Well, human behavior is a funny thing. So it's got very little to do with logic and reason, and we often find that in organizations we're kind of indoctrinated by whatever the common set of beliefs are. So you go and work in an organization, and it has a culture, but the culture is an output of the way that people behave. So, and the way that people behave is dictated by what they believe about how they're going to get their needs met. So you get into work on a Monday morning, and your boss tells you to do something, and you think, oh, right. You know the quickest way to get that thing done. And it might be go and talk to so-and-so over here, or you can take a shortcut by following this process. And you will start to do those things, and you will learn, and it will become part of the culture. And the way you behave will then output what people perceive as the culture of the organization. So you don't start to see things and make decisions based on the way they actually are. You see things as you are. And I thought that was a really good quote. And then it was sort of manifested itself into this quote from Bob Marshall that I really liked as well. Now, you can do very interesting things when you realise that people's behaviour is an output of what they believe about their needs, because you can then sort of game the way the organisation works and eventually the culture by changing that. So there's a very famous example with Netflix, and they did loads of stuff like this. They decided in 2006 to start getting out of their data centres. No more data centres. We want to. AWS was just starting up, 2006, 2008. And they said, this is going to change the world for us. We don't have to run all of this stack of stuff anymore. Let's start using AWS for everything. How are we going to get people to use it? Because you can imagine, 10 years ago, nobody wanted to touch it. And we're like, okay, if you want to deploy an application, it's going to go in our data center, you've got to write a 10-page business case. If you want to put it in AWS, you can do it now, no questions asked. What do you think people start to do? Right? That's a really good way of getting the culture. You can do that with anything. And you start to sort of raise the barriers to the stuff that you don't want people to do, and then you just make it really easy for them to do the stuff that you do want them to do. And you can start to change the way the organization behaves. And they changed the culture at Netflix by doing that. Everybody suddenly thought cloud first. I'm going to do that cloud first because I can do it right now. So you might come up against this problem. Now, this is a great quote as well. I found this through JP Rangaswamy. It goes back to that thing about purpose and, you know, bean counters and financially minded people. They think that the purpose of a business is to make money, but it's not. It's to make something of value. Right? In this case, it's shoes. So no financial man understands business. They think that the money is real. This is a real sort of top level problem, and it will kind of, all of these ideas that I'm sort of coming up with here, they reach a certain level. Everyone's going, yeah, that makes absolute sense. But eventually it gets to a point where it doesn't. It's like square peg, round hole scenario, and it gets to that C-level in the enterprise. Because if you're right at the top and you're the CEO of a 20,000 person company, all you care about is what the shareholders want, and you've got to hit certain financial metrics in order to keep your job and for the share price to stay in the right place. You've got to keep delivering the same thing over and over and over again in terms of the commercial output of the business. So all of this stuff about agile and DevOps and what it means and going faster, they don't care, right? And it doesn't mean anything to them because they don't understand how to deal with that information and realise that speeding things up in the organisation is really good for them. They can only measure things in terms of time and money, hence the project sort of mentality. One of the things that you can do here is to win friends at the top level of the organisation. If you really wanted to change and sort of make things become more cloud native and say, no, you should start adopting these ideas. We need investment to do that. You could also, I didn't put it on this slide here, but I'm thinking of introducing to this talk the idea of cost of delay, which is a really good thing you can use to explain how urgent things are. So instead of organising the priority of projects in your business by how much people are shouting about them and who the most influential person is in the business saying this is important, you say, no, what's the cost of not doing this? Are we going to lose £100 a day? Are we going to lose £5,000 a day? Are we going to lose £1 million a day? And that's how you decide what's important. For every week that we don't deliver this thing, we're going to lose this much money. We're going to not be able to sell this much. We're going to incur these costs, or we're going to miss out on. We're going to have this opportunity cost of not being able to sell this thing. That's how you should decide what's important and what's not. And I want to make a special mention about business cases. Now, business cases are something that the people at the top love because that's their way of measuring things, right? So you say, well, what would you like to try and achieve? Let's build a business case for delivering that project or that initiative. And the idea of a business case is that it mitigates the risk in delivering something. So the problem is it doesn't do that because it doesn't really focus on the key factors that affect the ROI. Now, it obsesses over cost, but cost is not what affects whether you make money on something. Whether you make money on something is determined by whether the project ever succeeds and it manages to get finished without being cancelled, or whether the thing that you were trying to produce actually gets used. So those are the two things that a business case should focus on, but in fact it focuses on how much things cost. So they're actually failing to address the real issue there. So always bear that in mind if you're faced with a business case. And I also like this quote as well, which was all about what embodied everything that I thought about business case, which is like, it's the process for getting things done, but it's also the process for not getting things done. So you just kind of, it's a sort of paradox that you find yourself stuck in. It's like, have you got a business case for that? No, you can't do that. And I think this is really the last thing I would say is like, just to recap on where we've gone then. So we've talked about cloud native enterprise, what it should look like. We've said that it's all about having a purpose, and it's all about getting people to measure things in the right way, so you're measuring the outcomes, not the outputs, and it's all about having products and not projects, so you arrange people into the right teams and make them cross-functional. And we've talked a little bit about some of the obstacles to that, and this is kind of the last obstacle that I would really point out, and that's enterprise structure and how it's optimized for efficiency. So if you are one of those bowler hat wearing people and sort of the C-level, you might find that you really want to make things efficient because you've got to hit these financial metrics. And you might start to arrange people into the opposite of what we've been talking about here, which is like, why would I put everyone in the same team? That's really efficient. I want to put all the developers here, and I'm going to put all the ops people, the server people here, and all the network people here, and make sure that I concentrate my resource into one team so that I'm making sure that I'm utilising them to the max. Because if I put people into one team based on a particular project or a particular outcome, I'm not going to get the best out of them. So let's split everyone up into a function-specific team, because that's really efficient. But what you end up with when you do that is this scenario where nothing appears to happen because everything is stuck in flight in a communication path between teams, in queues. And the thing is with queues is not that they're there, it's that because nobody thinks about them. So it can be as ridiculous as 80% of the time taken to deliver a feature is spent with that feature waiting for someone to look at it, right? Because you think about how much time things just spend sitting in email or sitting in a ticketing system, or and the more handoffs you have between teams, the more waiting time there is. But that's the idea behind putting everyone together in a single team. It's not just about sharing knowledge, it's about the fact that you're sitting next to someone, you've got the fastest possible feedback and no handoffs. So efficiency, unfortunately, in enterprise world means the opposite of that. And that's a real challenge. So one thing you can try and do is form an autonomous team anyway, just do it on a sort of skunkworks basis, and then try and prove that that works as quickly as you can. And say, look what we managed to do really quickly. We've managed to deliver this feature in like a week when it would have taken 6 months if we'd done it with everyone sitting in different teams. So, spoken about the problem, we've spoken a bit about what we think we're heading towards in terms of this cloud native enterprise concept, and some of the obstacles you might come up against and what you can might do about those. If you, this applies to, what I'm about to say applies to anything, not just the content of my talk, but something that I've come to appreciate recently is, if you think you've got a really good idea, it doesn't mean that everyone else does. And you have got to be treading very carefully when you're introducing new concepts and ideas to an organisation, especially a big one where you're going to maybe come up against a lot of resistance. And I've had, I've fairly recently in my career sort of come up against teams who I thought, how can you be working in this way? Teams that didn't use source control or something. We just got some version, we didn't use it. In a file system and move that stuff around. What? Sometimes it's like you go into the room and you feel like a cloud of bats and dust is just thrown out in your face, and it's like going back in time. But you can't think like that. You've just got to go, okay, that's how it is. Because if you oversell it, you will get negative reactions, and I've experienced that quite a lot as well. The relevance of this slide is that when I first did this talk, it was the day that Alan Rickman died, and I just slammed this one in at the last minute, so I haven't changed the deck. And finally, imagine, let's bring it back specifically to DevOps. You're a DevOps evangelist, right? And you're going to go into your employer and you're going to tell everyone on the team, you're going to be out of a job unless you get into DevOps. You're finished. You've got to start delivering things quickly. People don't respond well to that. If you think that someone's a dinosaur, all you're going to do is annoy them by telling them about this meteor that's crashing down to Earth to wipe them out. And the reason for that is that the way the human mind works is that when you tell someone, when you give them these fear tactics to try and scare them into doing what you want them to do and adopt these ideas, they should just filter it out, because we've all got all these worries in our lives, and it's just another thing on this long list of things we have to worry about. So you sort of go into shutdown and denial. You say, no, I don't want to hear it. I don't care about Amazon. I don't care about PaaS. And that's the kind of reaction. So it works initially. You might get people to pay attention to you by trying to scare them into doing stuff, but it doesn't work over the long term because people start to filter it out. Okay, that's kind of it. I've just got a couple more slides on stuff that you can go and look at. I'll give this deck to Andy and you can circulate it as well. Or if you look on my Twitter feed, you'll find links to it as well. So I wanted to make a special mention for these two talks, which were kind of influenced a lot of my thinking on this stuff. I discovered fairly recently this lady, Linda Rising, who'd written a book called Myths and Patterns of Organizational Change. Well, sorry, it was Fearless Change. And there's a talk on that. And Jez Humble, who wrote the Continuous Delivery book, has also been doing some great stuff around the Lean Enterprise book, which he's got out as well. And both of those books look like that. So a lot of the ideas that I spoke about here are in those books.